Say, welcome to the human side of change. The only Tableau talk, I will claim, with absolutely no Tableau in it. But I don't know if this will bomb or be fantastic, but you'll get that everywhere else this week. But I hope that you are here right now in this room because there is something that you want to change. You want to drive that change. Humans are, let's just say, messy. And change can be tough, but I've spent a lot of time and energy myself at Tableau, especially over the last 2 years, learning it and doing it. I've been with Tableau for over a decade now. I started out as a software programmer, and over that time we've grown literally 100x, from 40 people to over 4,000 people. So I've seen a lot of change over that time. But 2 years ago in particular, it hit me as we were sitting in a discussion circle. I was in the inner circle in the middle of 60+ dev team leaders and execs. This was the end of a 2-day offsite. We were looking at each other, and we were confronting the elephant in the room. Our efforts to grow and mature from a small dev team making shrink-wrap software to a 1,000-person dev team running subscription software as a service in the cloud. Our prior efforts had not been enough. And we didn't need just a few more tweaks. We needed a transformation. So at that moment, when our co-founder looked around at us at the circle and said, "So, who's going to do something about this?" that I waited a heartbeat, waited another heartbeat, and then raised my hand and said, "I will." I made my voice sound much more confident than I felt at that moment. Inside I'm going, "I will? Okay then," but that launched me into a full-time, multi-year journey on a giant change mission. And I confess, I had only inklings of how to go after something this big, or really even what it was that we were going to do. After a few months of churn, we figured out we were going to name our change Continuous Delivery. And continuous delivery is a specific thing in the software world, and I'm not going to go into that in any depth today, but it's a pretty deep thing. It's a way of working, and it wasn't the way that we were working at that time. So even after figuring out the goals, it's been messy. Let me just tell you, it's been real. And I'm spelling that to be clear, I-T-S, no S on the front. It's been real. And my last few years have been full of learning and failure and growth and more learning and improvement. Your challenge or your path, whatever it is that you want to change, may not match mine or look anything similar to mine. But I proposed this talk, and they accepted it, because maybe I've hit something along the way that is relevant to you right now, where you are. At least that's my hope. I bet that you, sitting there right now, can think of that thing that you already know that you want to change. Is that true? Raise your hand if you can think of some specific thing in your head right now that you want to change. All right, a lot of hands. Good, good. Think about that thing today as I babble on. And that thing, whether it's in your team, your organization, your company, and look for the connections. I want you to know that I'm approaching this talk as a fellow student in the classroom of life, as a fellow traveler on the journey, on the path to enlightenment, and not the guru at the end of that path. I am still learning a lot, and I do not have any foolproof recipe or some grand unified theory of change here. But what I have assembled is basically a tool belt full of tools. And I got opinions, so here we go. I've collected these models and opinions into 4 clusters, and I've ordered them for this talk in the same order that I learned them over the past few years. So we're going to go from conventional to cutting edge to a little crazy and mind-blowing, at least for my mind. I don't know about your mind. Results may vary. But let's dive in with change management. And first, just a note on even that phrase, change management. I kind of have some complicated feelings, some mixed feelings about this phrase and this field now. Early on, when I first wandered into this, I felt like, yes, someone else has solved this problem. There's a whole field called change management. Awesome, sign me up. Where's my instruction booklet? But it didn't turn out that easy. And now, having been a little bit disillusioned with some of the magical incantations or the recipes that I found in change management, I question some of the assumptions even baked into the notion of what people typically mean when they say change management. I'll expand on that in a minute, but spoiler alert, humans don't really make good rational cogs in a machine. We're not so logical sometimes. But to start with, click. All right. Starting out very basic, goals. Setting a goal. What are you going to do? What are you going to change? There's an acronym soup. There's a whole bunch of different acronyms and ways of referring to this. And I'll go through a few just to say that it's fairly simple. None of these are actually something that's too complex. But you might start by saying something big. We're going to land a man on the moon in this decade. Something like that you'd call a BHAG, or a big, hairy, audacious goal. All right, you've got a what. Great, good first step. Now, how are you going to tell how far you are, or even when you've gotten there? KPIs are another acronym. This just means this is a good thing to measure. And these are often quantitative. These are quantitative and often normalized to kind of a 0 to 1 or 100% ratio, so you can kind of turn them into a progress bar. You can tell how far along you are, if indeed that metric actually measures the thing that you really care about and can't be gamed too badly. But put both of those together, and you might have what we call OKRs, objective and key results. This just combines both sides of the equation, the thing that you want to do, and how you're going to measure it. It makes both parts explicit, and in this framework, you usually put together 3 to 5 key result metrics that try to put together a little bit better, more well-rounded picture of measuring the objective that you're trying to achieve. We actually, in our continuous delivery program team at Tableau, just a month ago, decided that we were going to standardize all of our 2019 goals in OKR format. And we're even going to do it hierarchically. You can nest these things with higher level and lower level OKRs. It's not a revolution, but it just because it brings clarity, and it's good to standardize the way that we're tracking our goals and how we're measuring those things. So this is a good start. We've got goals. You have to have some form of goal alignment. Goal setting is just the start. It barely gets into even change management since so far I've completely ignored what you're going to do to try to reach your objective or how you're going to get there. So the how starts to take us into what I, at least in my impression, is the single most famous thing in the change management field, Kotter's 8-step method. How many folks in this room, just to gauge, how many folks have heard of Kotter or the 8 steps? Okay, 30, 20, maybe a quarter folks? Okay, all right, so this was published in 1996, a little over 20 years ago. My personal assessment on this, looking back on, I think it was maybe 4 years ago that I first read this book, this is good, and this was groundbreaking in the field. But it's also, in my opinion, no longer sufficient or good enough. It really opened the door on the human side of change, and it grasps some of the human aspects of change management that are required to execute a large, transformational, kind of culture-shifting style of change. The not so great about this and what it set for the field of change management was that it seems to be written assuming multi-year time spans, assuming that change is this big exceptional thing that you do and then you go back to being normal, which is not changing. Assumes that people inherently resist change, coming kind of from a perspective of change being a thing that is done to people or that you do to people, which hint is why they usually resist it. So top-down perspective there. So, but if you've got a big change and you're just starting out at the outset, this is a good place to start. Is there really a sense of urgency? Or is your first task to convince other people that there's even a need or a problem? Do you have a sufficient guiding coalition of those in authority around you? Or are you tilting at a windmill all off on your own? This is, if you miss some of these things, yeah, you'll fail if you miss some of these. So as a checklist, I still look at this. This is still useful. Some of these steps have a little bit more of a flavor of being a particular solution to an underlying need. I would say, for example, that you don't always need an army in step 4 there, an army working on big initiatives for every different kind of change. But what is the need underlying that, whether you need an army or not in a particular case? This leads us to another change management approach that pivots from kind of more of a recipe of solution steps to a list of the needs that you're trying to address in a particular change. And if Kotter's approach felt to me to be tailored to very big changes, then my vibe from AddCar here as a model is that it's great for small to medium changes. It's practical, it's fairly simple. I like to check this list when I'm driving the adoption of a new tool or the adoption of a small new technical process or practice. Concrete things that don't require as much in the way of what you'd call cultural or deep change. Say I have a new tool recently in Tableau that can check your code complexity for developers as they write code before they check it in. I'll look through this and I'll examine, okay, awareness. Do they know that this tool exists? How would they know that it exists? Then desire. Do they want it? Do they, and that's made up of, do they think that this meets a need? And also, do they think that they have that need? Sometimes that's easy to miss. But connecting the dots on what it is, what problem it solves for you, and why you should want it. Very useful step. Then do they have the knowledge and the ability to use this new tool? And what Kotter labeled institutionalization as step 8 of his 8 steps, AddCar labels reinforcement or sustaining. How are you going to reinforce the change and set it so that it sticks, so that it becomes a long-term, permanent, lasting habit? So this is good too. There is a whole book. You can read a bunch just very quickly on their website. I recommend it. Now, to come back to the kind of deeper or more cultural changes, this brings us to my favorite power tool of a model inside Tableau for change management, and which is the behavior engineering model. Behavior engineering, this is the study of why do humans behave the way that they do. The lineage on this goes all the way back to B.F. Skinner, but this model was named in a 1978 book by Thomas Gilbert, refined in 1998 in what was called the 6 boxes model, and this is still online if you want to find that. And credit for the 2018 Tableau edition of this model goes to my esteemed colleague Arlo Belshi at Tableau. This is an ordered list of the things that influence people's behavior, 1 through 6, from strongest to weakest. Top 4 are norms and expectations, tools and processes, data and visible results, skills and knowledge. We take those top 4 and we tend to ignore 5 and 6 here because those are mostly taken care of usually in the context of a company or an organization. Raw capability limits. you usually do some screening at hiring for how much capability people have. So this is mostly people are capable. And motivation and desires, people already come to work. They are motivated to do a good job. They want to do a good job in their work. So we can leave off 5 and 6. We take the top 4, multiplex these by whether or not this factor is inside or outside of an individual person and their brain. And that takes us to the real form of this 4x2 grid, where the reason that someone does or doesn't exhibit any particular behavior almost always falls somewhere in here. And thinking through these categories, trying to find them all, is quite comprehensive. The most important, by far, is norms and expectations. Starting with the internal beliefs of what's inside my head. What do I assume? What do I not even think to question because it's just the way that things are inside my own internal beliefs? Or in a group, externally, social norms, the way that we do things around here. What expectations do I conform to, and what do I go along with, and what do we collectively as a group not question because that's just the way that it's always been done. You know, that phrase is the death knell of change everywhere. Moving over to tools and processes, we want to look at work tools. What do I use to actually do my job, and how does that influence what behaviors I take? Our tools make it easier or harder to do certain things. And then governance is still tools and processes, but more of a process and practice side. How do we decide corporately and collectively in governance of what we are going to do? How do we decide what we're going to do, and how do we do it? Moving to data, where data is important, even though it's third. The data in the internal space is all about what are the visible effects of my action for me as I take that action. As I do a behavior, what do I see right then and there that's feedback to me that feeds back into the next action or the next behavior that I'm going to take? Very short internal loop there. Or also, what about others? What data are other people going to look at in order to judge my results and evaluate the work that I'm doing? A lot of power here. You think like, oh, that's where my boss looks after me. Or what metrics, how are we measuring the results of what are we doing? And then in learning, you're either pulling knowledge to you, you know that you need something, and so you're grabbing or learning the knowledge as you need it, or else you don't know what you don't know. And in that case, the knowledge needs to be pushed to you in order to prompt or support that behavior at the right time. All right, so that's kind of the box by box tour of this grid here. This is a map of where behavioral influences are found. You can take this grid and fill in the grid with first just descriptions of what is the current reality, what things, what influences support the way that people currently work or the behaviors that they currently exhibit. Then take another grid, a fresh one, and fill it in with your world that you hope to see. What would it look like, and what sort of influences would be happening in this if people are taking the behavior that you hope that they do? Or you can fill in a grid with experiments of how to change things within each bucket. Here's a real whiteboard photo that I just snapped with my own phone of a whiteboard in our Seattle office. There are no trade secrets in here. We were examining here how to shift developer behavior towards more incremental code refactoring as they do their development. We don't always fill in all of these boxes, and this is a pretty deep tool, so we don't use this for every change all the time, but I have seen things using this grid, using this model that AddCar or Cotter didn't give to me, or didn't raise up to the same level of visibility that made it easy for me to see them. But particularly this first column, if you start asking, what are the norms and expectations, and you start thinking, what are these unquestioned beliefs that we have, you'll find that you can name them and that you can see them. And that's really important. Arlo says that he does intend to publish this model out to the world. And if he doesn't get around to it, I will. But this is on our internal wiki at the moment and gets used a fair amount. Another thing that is big within Tableau is, root cause analysis, or RCA. This is a familiar concept. Something happened, and you try to figure out the real cause why. Can I just check? See your hands if you've heard of RCA before. Can you raise your hand right now? All right, keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. All right, how many of all of those hands? Keep your hand up if you've participated in a root cause analysis exercise. Okay, a lot of people. Great, awesome, cool. I'm going to share how we use this strategically as a change management model, an approach. In the Tableau dev team, this is our strategy for reducing our defect stream. You know, the rate at which we write software bugs that then we have to catch. Anywhere you have a big complex system with a stream of problems that keeps happening, incremental investment can give you the best ROI, the best bang for your buck. First, what we did is we made a simple, lightweight RCA template that without doing a full 5 whys analysis or fishbone diagram, these 3 questions help us to point at the hazards in the system. What set us up to make the mistake? What made the mistake harder to find? And what made the mistake harder to fix? You'll notice that one of these questions is not, whose fault is it? As you hopefully know about RCAs, a core principle is that the human was not the problem. It was the system that induced the human being to make the mistake due to hazards that are inside the system. If you blame people, that's like saying, my car was damaged because I drove it over this pothole. Sure, okay, maybe I could have seen and avoided that pothole. But I'm not going to avoid every pothole, and the right solution isn't to put up a sign next to the pothole saying drivers beware. The solution is to fill in the pothole, right? So these 3 questions help us to identify the hazards that induce mistakes. Then, what we label and add on to this as remediation is our particular approach to doing incremental investment in this kind of problem stream. We don't fix the whole system. We decide based on the impact, how much time to invest in system remediations based on the severity of the immediate problem that we're dealing with. And then if we don't do these tasks right away or within a very short time frame, we just throw them away. We throw away the task because, well, it wasn't important to get to enough in the last few days, and the next problem is going to be coming tomorrow or the next day, so we can't let them pile up. If you didn't get to it, if you didn't improve the hazard, or even if you did work on it but it didn't improve all the way, well then guess what? Another problem in the same area or of the same type will come rolling down the pipe and you'll work on it some more. And if it doesn't happen again, great. You found where to stop working on the system, where to stop investing, and you saved yourself some work that might have been wasted. Over time, this approach can guide your incremental investment effort to be invested in the best way possible, all in a distributed fashion with no coordinated central planning. This doesn't require big, surveys and, oh, we're gonna go in and rewrite this portion of code, or oh, we're gonna go rewrite the world here. It's distributed, and all that's required for it to work is that you can incrementally, piece by piece, make things a little bit better. I think that is really cool and underappreciated. There are lots of resources out there in the world on RCA and doing good RCAs, and those are all great. But thinking about remediation in this way is another thing that we're planning to publish. All right, so far we've been talking about change management. Whether that's Tableau adoption or getting your team to do something new, or even convincing your org about what a particular need is. We've been talking so far as if you already know what needs to change. Next, I'm going to talk about some techniques for discovering what it is that needs to change, specifically within a group context. Even if you know probably already exactly what you think is wrong with the world and needs to change, going through a discovery process with other people is often a lot more effective than just telling them your conclusion, giving them your opinion. Think back to Kotter's sense of urgency or guiding coalition phases. The more that people share in the authorship and ownership of the discovery of a change, the more likely they are to be allies instead of resistors. So first up, I cheated just a little bit earlier because the behavior engineering model is also a discovery model. It straddles the two. You start from a top-line change that's the thing that you know that you want to shift, but going down into these boxes is about discovering the smaller supporting influences that need to change in order to support that top-line goal that you care about. But don't use this for sourcing initial change discovery. For initial discovery, I really want to promote retrospectives. Next survey. How many folks here are part of an organization that identifies itself as doing Agile methodologies in some way? Whether the A is capitalized or not, I don't care. Okay, a good majority of the room. All right, keep your hands up one more time. Hands up if you're doing Agile. Now, how many of you folks are on then a small team that is regularly doing retrospectives? See some hands go down. All right, those are hands up. Good for you. The rest of you, good news. You don't even have to be doing Agile to do retrospectives. This is just a regular gathering to pause and look at things, including your own feelings, including your team dynamics, to inspect and adapt how your team is working. One Agile coach at Tableau calls this book his Bible. It's practical, I recommend it, and being intentional about the inspect and adapt loop can handle so much change within a team. Identifying what's wrong in the first place is sometimes just as hard as actually fixing it. Now, sometimes at Tableau, as Agile coaches, we see or hear a team raise an issue or an impediment in their retrospective, and then they'll raise it in the next one, and in the next one, over and over, and then after a while, it stops. But not in a good way, not because the problem has been solved. It stops because they gave up. People will give up and stop mentioning something, even in well-structured retrospectives. So before you lose your chance to change something, you have to ask yourself, what can we do about it? And this model helps with that. It's named Circles and Soup, and it's for classifying different problems by the level of control that you have over them, which determines the type of action that you can take. This picture here is literally the model. If your team has full control, the central circle, great. Just fix it, direct action, no problem. If your team doesn't have control, though, the useful question is, can we influence this, and how? Oftentimes you can, and that focuses your thinking on how to shape your influencing action and what shape that should take. Then yes, sometimes your team will say, we don't even have any influence over this problem or this situation. It just lives out there in the soup. In that case, how are you going to respond? How will you or your team mitigate the impact on yourself, or route around the broken thing so that your team can best cope with this currently immutable fact of reality? I saw one particular team at Tableau, I won't name them, but stare at a problem of a code testing framework, which they felt was blocking them from getting the value out of the tests that they were writing. They didn't own it, and that they felt they weren't getting any traction with the team that did own this framework. So after living with this for a while, one of them eventually said, you know, could we just quit using this framework? And somebody else said, can we do that? Are we allowed to do that? And they started talking, and they're going back and forth about, they started talking about what they could control. Oh, we could move all of these over here to ABC. No, we still need some of X, Y, Z. And in the end, this team decided not all or nothing, but they decided to move about 90% of their tests to a different, smaller code form that they had more control over. And they left about a dozen of these original tests in this framework where really it's no problem. If the framework acted up or they had reliability issues, it was easy to rerun them or even check them by hand. That was what happened when they started thinking about what they did control. This team had lived with this friction, this problem, for multiple years prior to that realization. So don't do that. Figure out what kind of control you have and use it. Another discovery tool, and this is super common at Tableau, gets used all the time. It's called structural tension. It's very simple. This is the tension between the way things are and the way you want things to be. So any change or challenge can be looked at in this way. This is just about being intentional about it. You go and write down, what is the ideal state? Do it as a group. Go up there and write it on a whiteboard together. Then write down, what is the current reality? Write them next to each other. Compare and contrast them to each other. And this helps a group really converge on a shared idea of what they want and the reality that they're facing. Most of the time when I've done this at Tableau, we do this just in free text. We write up on a whiteboard. But you can also do this with the behavior engineering model grids. I talked about a grid for current reality, a grid for ideal state. And there are more questions in and more variations on this model. And the URL traces it to a 1999 book, but this thing is the kind of thing that's probably been invented thousands of times, I'm sure, in different places over the year. It's been super helpful within Tableau to be concrete and intentional about it and say, this is what we're doing. And everybody's on the same page, and okay, we're going to go into this, and we're going to examine the structural tension. All right, now I'd like to look at becoming more adaptable, shifting so that change doesn't have to be managed, quote unquote, quite so hard and starts becoming a little more normal. You might know this joke. It was popularized by a David Foster Wallace speech where two young fish are swimming along and an older fish swims by and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And they swim on and then they look at each other and they go, "What the heck is water?" You know, haha, yeah, it's not even funny anymore because it's just sad, right? It's true. Changing what we can't see is hard. And some of those things are the way that we change. But when we can lift things out of the environment, when we can see them and name them, we start to see the water that we're swimming in. We can start to challenge our assumptions about how hard or how unusual change is. So here are some things, I'm getting a little further out here now, that we can change about change. Ooh, meta. All right, I cheated again. I already told you about one. Retrospectives give us change discovery and are a mechanism that changes how improvement feels. It turns it into a social norm, a regular rhythm. Inspect and adapt, practiced regularly, makes it normal to ask, how could we be better? How could we be even more effective as a team? And any impediment to team awesomeness becomes, just as a matter of course, a target for seeing it, questioning it, and removing it. That is a powerful team norm to establish. More on teams and effective teams. Google did a big internal study a few years ago called Project Aristotle, where they examined all of their teams and they crunched all of the data and they found 5 top factors of effective teams: psychological safety, dependability, structure and clarity, meaning and impact of their work. But number 1, and I'll quote here this, psychological safety was by far the most important dynamic of effective teams. Effective teams are safe teams where people feel safe to take risks and be vulnerable with each other. If you can't take a risk without feeling insecure or you're going to be embarrassed if it doesn't work out, then change is dangerous. Improvement is actively avoided. Effectiveness is constrained, and people start to feel boxed in and unable to utilize their skills and their strengths. So, how can you bring safety to a team or an organization? Google recommends these 3 things. Click. Frame the work as a learning problem, not an execution problem. Acknowledge your own fallibility, even by, number 3, modeling curiosity and asking lots of questions. Okay, but take a look at number 1 again. Frame the work as a learning process. This means don't optimize for results. What? Crazy, right? But what I mean is don't optimize directly for first-order results. Optimize for learning in your direct accountability structures in your organization, and the results then become a signal and a side effect of the good learning that you're doing. That's how to encourage risk-taking. If you are responsible for every single thing that you try succeeding, you will only try very safe things because you don't want to fail, right? But if you are responsible for learning, failure can become normalized, and you will end up magnifying or multiplying your ultimate success. This really comes out and is exemplified by the lean startup movement. How many folks have heard lean startup or encountered that somewhere? Yeah, it's really traveling through, okay, some industries more than others. This is how you optimize for learning by weaponizing the scientific method as a strategy of learning and innovation. You seek to identify and disprove your assumptions. You want to learn as fast as possible by executing a build, measure, learn loop as fast and as many times as you can, as fast as possible. When I got this, and it took a year or 2 after I first read the book to really get it, when I got this changed how I look at strategy. To the point where I think now that having a strategy can be a bad strategy. What I mean there is that in the traditional sense of strategy, of you make a decision and you invest a lot of money in developing a solution or a product that addresses that need, and then you launch it out into the marketplace and hope for a big payoff. Instead, the lean anti-strategy is to not think that we're so smart, that we can make those kinds of predictions and reliably have them pay off. You place small bets more on every number in the roulette wheel. And then if we can learn fast enough, you can adjust your bets midstream to improve the payoffs that you get. I think this is really powerful, and I'm all in on this. Now, should you do everything this way? Where should you apply lean thinking or not? This takes us to recognizing the domains of knowability. Kind of a weird word there, knowability. But this is a model by Dave Snowden called Kineton. I can't quite pronounce the Welsh word properly there, but Kineton zooms out on what kind of space you're operating in and how to manage in that space. This is really abstract, so I'm going to talk about projects and project estimates and project management. Most of the time, when we estimate work remaining on a project, we operate as if we are in the obvious space. This is a burn-down chart. You might recognize the cone of uncertainty that folks talk about, but as time progresses, the work remaining goes down in a linear fashion, and the ambiguity, you get more precision over time. How many folks know that that is not the way that the real world works a lot of the time? Amen to that. If you've ever given or been asked for, or you've asked for a date, and you know that you're just making something up and then padding it a bunch and then padding it a little more and running with that and hoping that the world conforms to your wild-ass guess, then maybe you're operating in the complicated space. If you are in the complicated space, this is the kind of project where your estimation of work remaining at the start goes up, and it goes up, and it goes up some more as you discover more and more the things that you didn't know at the start of the project. Now, at a certain point, with the right expertise, you get the things that you need to analyze, and the project sort of turns the corner or goes over that hump and then starts to burn down work similar to before. Now, where lean startup really shines as the place to apply it is in the complex space, where you don't analyze so much as you experiment. You probe and you sense, and your burn down just doesn't budge. Are we done? I don't know. We're still trying to learn. And then when you discover the thing, boom, you're done. You jump down to zero. There's a zero line on that chart there. Because when you make the discovery, aha, you've got it. And you learned the thing that you needed to learn. That's what innovation looks like. By all means, when you know that you don't know things, operate in that method. But when you know that you don't need to learn anything, this is something that you've done already and you feel confident in that first estimate and you're going to burn it down, then by all means, go apply known best practices to those cases. Or these can mix too. Maybe your project, to finish this up, maybe your project is mostly complicated, but some pieces within it are complex. But just thinking about this kind of map of what the landscape looks like, which rules apply to you currently in your state of knowledge based upon what kind of challenge or change you're trying to do, this is powerful. Now I want to come back to Agile one more time. I am an Agile believer. Despite the number of bad Agile or bad Scrum or bad transformations that I see people chuckling, we've all heard of them or experienced them, but I am a believer, and I see a lot of truth in this Agile fluency model that was developed a few years back by Agile luminaries Jim Shore and Diana Larson. This is a model and it has 4 zones of behavior relative to agility, or behavior relative to value delivery. Different companies or orgs or industries are going to have different needs or desires as far as how much agility is right for them, but calling your shot is going to make you more likely to actually end up hitting your target. So zone 1, focusing, is about shifting team culture. When we talk about retrospectives, this is where, okay, we start doing retrospectives, daily stand-up, let's do sprints, let's write good user stories, get our team focused effectively on value. And it's okay to do this, and do this within the teams, and to stop there. But my assessment is that most bad or failed Agile transformations is where people do just this, but they were hoping or thinking that they were going to get a lot more, get a lot further along the bus route here. Zone 2 is about delivering value well and improving team skills. Agile, and for software development, this is where, for me, XP comes in, extreme programming, if anyone's heard of that in the software world, where practices such as pair programming and mobbing, working together in some more radical ways, helps with knowledge transfer and raising team skills, helping people be more cross-functional, helping your teams be more adaptive, more capable, able to deliver with more agility. Zone 3 is called optimizing, and the little text over there says shift organizational structure. Uh-oh, org chart, now it's getting serious. If you optimize your organization for agility, you may end up slicing your org chart in a different way, where you find you're going to put sales and marketing and product development all together in a medium to small team. And this, trying to get to startup levels of agility, even if you're doing this within a big corporation. Now, you may not want or need, to be fair, that level of agility for your situation. But in my opinion, it's this zone, and knowing what does this zone mean, and the potential here, as well as the first 2 zones, that this is why Agile became such a big deal in the first place. So, if you're struggling with your Agile transformation somewhere, you take a look at this. And my own, not to put myself on par with those other thinkers or try to name something after myself, this is just literally my personal opinion. on my own model of Agile success. I think you need 3 parts to make Agile methodologies work for your organization. Agile teaming, Agile engineering, or whatever kind of work you're doing if it's not engineering, and Agile leadership. When we started our Agile journey at Tableau several years ago now, we made the mistake of doing what I just referred to, of starting just at the teams and the team practices. And when you do that without changing the way that leadership operates, how decisions get made, how planning gets done, when you do that, you'll hit a wall where the teams get stuck and they're unable to remove further impediments for themselves because they're running up against organizational constraints, the way we do things in the larger framework or in the systemic way. So they'll be stuck until all 3 of these things are brought online, all 3 of these are brought into alignment. So that's my contribution there, and since Agile is an entire industry with dozens to hundreds of books and thousands of consultants, I'll ease up on pretending that I've got it all solved or anything like that. All right, so finally, if you're still with me, I want to talk about consciousness, complexity, and culture. I believe that workplaces and organizations could be radically different environments. I believe that they could be full of joy and full of personal development and a radical, dynamic adaptability where change ceases to be a thing that you do or think about even. It's just instead becomes a way of being. I also believe that this does not come at the cost of effectiveness or profits. I think it's a trade-off. It's not a trade-off. And this is what I'm going for. At Tableau or elsewhere until I succeed or they drag me off in a straitjacket, this is the goal of my career, because that's how I want to work. To do this, we have to go deeper inside of ourselves. Because this story starts in the land of developmental psychology, the field of adult development, which started about 40 years ago by recognizing that adults keep growing, not physical brain structure, but keep growing in psychological complexity throughout their lifetime. The academics have mapped out some stages, developmental stages with plateaus and transitions that people tend to grow throughout their adult life. No stage is right or wrong, and I'll tell you right now, being more complex does not make you happier inherently as a person. But each stage is a bigger perspective, a bigger canvas with more objects available to work with and play with. Each stage takes some things from the environment where you're subject to them and turns them into objects that you can work with. So that's the subject-object shift as defined by Robert Kegan. And he's defined 3 adult development stages. The first here is the socialized mind. This is where my relationships define me. I've learned how to interact with and behave and play nice with other people. And I derive my value and my self-worth from being that valued member of a community and fitting in with that community. Then a lot of people, probably the majority of folks in this kind of room, have made the transition to what Kegan calls the self-authoring mind. That is where we know who we are, and more of our identity comes from our values, our purpose. We know what we stand for. So we can still get along with people, and we can still play nice, but we also know when to break the rules. And when to operate, break those rules based upon our own purpose and our own identity. And then, much rarer, Kegan claims, is the self-transforming mind, where you go to the next stage of not just having a self-defined identity, but having multiple of these identities, even some that can conflict or seem paradoxical to hold both, but we can start to apply these different senses of identity in different environments. I confess I have not fully grokked that one myself. But there are a few different ways of breaking down these stages. The academics have different levels of granularity, but they're all congruent. They all fit with each other. And there's a bit of evidence in the studies so far that have been done in this field. First, there's evidence that says that knowing about these stages and that they exist can help people to grow through the stages a little bit faster, so there you go. There's also a bit of evidence that the developmental complexity of leaders, particularly leaders of organizations, is highly correlated with how successful they are perceived as being, as a leader of their organization. And there's kind of a ceiling effect or a cap of the developmental complexity of the leaders of an org or a company kind of acting as the ceiling of how that organization itself can manifest complexity and adaptability. So something to think about. I'm just going to set that down and walk away from that. Here is one specific tool by Keegan and Leahy that contributes directly to this kind of personal growth. This book lays out what they call an immunity to change mapping tool that can help us. If you're facing a personal development challenge or a performance issue at work, or you just know that you need to behave, you want to behave differently in some way, the strongest change aversion oftentimes within ourselves comes from our values. Comes from values inside of us. Often these are self-protective values that are deep within us, often just trying to keep ourselves from getting hurt again. Those hidden values can work against our stated goals. It's like having one foot on the gas and another foot on the brake at the same time. Just a lot of tension and friction. Someone at Tableau, literally a couple months ago, said to me, I want to show up in this way as a leader with my team, but I find that I keep doing this other behavior instead. And when I hear that, I know that this person is primed for this kind of complexity growth, and that this tool is a concrete one that can help people see and move through that kind of reconciliation of their different values. Now, I want to be clear, you cannot do this to someone. You cannot make someone grow. You can do this in yourself, and at most you can invite other people to try going through it with you. The book gives some examples about teams going through this together and supporting each other in it, though I haven't done that with a team at Tableau, I confess. But I'm really excited about this. I'm also excited about these same authors. Their next book looks at developmental complexity and applies it directly to organizations. Keegan and Leahy, this is called an everyone culture. And the thesis of this book is that, quote, in most organizations, nearly everyone is doing a second job no one is paying them for, namely, covering their weaknesses, trying to look their best, managing other people's impressions of them. I don't know about you, but that resonates with me. If you're like me, when you go to work, you slip on this mask that's called professionalism. And professionalism, a good thing, don't get me wrong, but professionalism pretends that we don't have emotions, pretends that we're purely logical, and most of all, that we have already got all our stuff together. And what this book profiles is how to turn that around from guarding weaknesses to building strengths. What if a company did everything in its power to create a culture in which everyone could overcome their own internal barriers to change, remember immunity to change from the last slide, and use errors and vulnerabilities as prime opportunities for personal and company growth? When I think back to lean startup in the last section and optimizing for learning, I think, why don't we do that for people too? Why don't we optimize for personal development? This book profiles 3 real companies in depth with detail about their practices. And to me, the biggest characteristics that I took out of this book about being a deliberately developmental organization are that people development and profitability are not in conflict. These 3 companies in this book cite the work that they do in people development as one of their main driving forces of their profitability. That you can bring your whole self to work and share, gasp, your weaknesses with your teammates. So then everyone knows everyone else's growth edge is what they call it, everyone's developmental edge, and visibly supports their learning in a high-trust environment. And finally, these companies are very intentional about the practices of transparency and feedback and honesty, the practices and culture that support this way of being. Because this sounds really different, right? From what my workplace or your workplace, I'm not saying Tableau is a bad place or that any of your workplaces are bad either. But gosh, I would sure love to work in a place like that. This book is an existence proof and describes the practices of those real companies and just invites us to try them out and see where it gets us. Lastly, and even more grandly, Frederick Laloux. This book is a couple years old. He's sold 400,000 copies of this book, Reinventing Organizations. And at the core of this is a sociological, societal model developed by the spiral dynamics of Claire Graves and in integral philosophy by Ken Wilber and others. Laloux applies it to organizations. And here are 3 relevant stages of dominant mode behavior in organizations. Orange is the well-oiled machine of modernity, flowing from the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. The modern company is centered on meritocracy, accountability, and innovation. These are the inventions of modernity in the 1900s that were added onto, a bunch of other previous stages. Green, the next stage, moves from a machine to a family metaphor. This is where companies start professing values. Companies didn't used to have values. They start emphasizing empowerment and equality. It started to emerge maybe in the 70s. Think the hippies and onward. But many, many companies and orgs in the world today are green. Tableau is a very green company. Our values are very important to us. Or green-orange blend. Each stage transcends and adds to the previous. So you don't give up on those orange traits, but there's definitely a tension in which one is dominant. We're in this kind of weird space in any orange-green hybrid where we've got this traditional, management hierarchy, but then, so we say, okay, here's the power structure. Now please don't use it. Please be a good boss. Please be a kind boss. Be a servant leader. Don't abuse that power of that hierarchy. So there's definitely that latent tension underneath a lot of things here. And so then teal, the last stage, is whatever the heck comes next. Laloux identifies 3 things in what he thinks are the companies and the orgs of the future. First is self-management. Yes, that is what it sounds like. You collapse the whole management hierarchy inside of each person, and then you replace the decision-making hierarchy with other more flexible structures. Second is wholeness. What Keegan and Leahy were talking about in their book last slide. Bring your whole self to work, just like their an Everyone Culture book. And last, evolutionary purpose. This one's a little hard to condense, but I'll say briefly, just sort of take the mission statement down off of the wall, of your company, the plaque where it's engraved, and more continually sense where that purpose is going and where the work that your organization is doing according to that purpose is going. Kind of both of those things co-evolve as the organization continues its journey. One thing that Laloux claims about all of these companies, he profiles like 8 to 12 different companies to different degrees in this book. And he claims that these companies, they don't do change management. And change is just like breathing. It uses a metaphor of the living organism for the organization, a living organism that continuously adapts to its environment. Now, how many of you can imagine the whole org chart going poof at your company tomorrow? Me either. This is super radical stuff. And yet this book profiles companies that are doing these things, or in some cases have been doing these things for decades. My favorite example from the book is a Dutch company called Buurtzorg, who over the span of, I think they're about 8 years old, they now employ 14,000 or so, like 2/3 of all the home healthcare nurses in the Netherlands now work for this organization. They are built in teams, 1,000 different teams of nurses, and just nurses, doing their thing. They have a central office for 14,000 people of 50 people at corporate in the central office. And self-management takes care of the rest. It's kind of mind-blowing. But this book offers up these practices as ideas and glimpses of that invite us to consider what are the biggest and best expressions of what people and what organizations could potentially be in the future. All right, so there we go. I'm done with my crazy stuff. This is all I could fit in today. You can take a picture of this if you want to search for any of these later without having to scrub through the video. This is every model and keyword name that I covered in the talk. I can't fully compress a decade into an hour, but I don't know. I hope I hit something along the way here that was valuable to you. Before we go, I want to leave you with one more thing, with one final word before you walk out of here today. And that word is, still see cameras up, I'll give you one more second. All right, that word is mindfulness. You might sense already that that's kind of been a theme underneath things in my talk here. The practice of noticing what usually goes unnoticed, of expanding your awareness to observe the things that we normally assume and that we don't question and just take for granted. You already have the courage to try to change things. That's why you showed up here today. That's why you're in this room. You have the courage, and to that, I would exhort you not just to study the change management models and do change execution competently, but also to grow in system thinking, systemic awareness, not just self-awareness. Helps us grow, helps us expand, helps us to develop that complexity to see more things and to encompass more complexity so that we can meet the ever more complex challenges that this world is throwing at us and at our organizations. Noticing things and systemic awareness can be a superpower. It's felt like a superpower inside of Tableau. It can be a superpower in your organization or in our society. The world needs to change. How many of us know that that is true in so many ways? Society needs more change makers. And so much of any system is found in the in-between spaces. This is one of my biggest learnings. In the we space in between people. It's not how competent we are as individuals, but it's the we space between people that determines so much of the effectiveness or the changeability of any given organization. So, the more of us that can be intentional about growing and shaping our orgs and our society together, the better off that we'll all be. So, thank you for being here, thank you for your time, and good luck. As you walk to your next talk, please remember to complete the session survey in your app, your evaluations. Did this bomb? Was it terrible? Did you love it? Helps us for the future. And also, I'll be here for a few minutes up front if you'd like to chat, or you can reach out to me on Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever. Anyways, thank you. Have a great rest of your conference.